Hello, my friends. Recently, I had the amazing opportunity to interview independent game developer 128 Megahertz over on Twitter. That's at 128 underscore MHZ. Look him up. He's amazing. There's way more footage of his game on his Twitter. His game is called Brass Bellow. It's this really interesting looking open world game. It's not quite like anything I've ever seen or ever heard of. Even the aesthetic is just so unique. I cannot wait to get into this interview with you guys. In the background, I'm just going to be looping some amazing footage the developer kindly provided me with. It's just a small slice of it. It's sort of a little bit more recent, a little more representative, but it's all still subject to change. It's all still non-final. In fact, everything in an interview like this is going to be subject to change and non-final, so it's important to keep that in mind. Anyway, let's do this. Acknowledging this is all subject to change, game dev is unpredictable, and discussing an unreleased game is like trying to talk about a pie before the recipe's finished. If you were going to pitch Brass Bellow in as few words as possible, how would you describe it? 128 Megahertz says, I would say something like, Brass Bellow is an open-world seafaring exploration game. It's all about immersing yourself in a place that really has a pulse of its own, and interacting with the strange, fun inhabitants along the way. Do you think Brass Bellow fits into any particular genres? If so, which? 120 Megahertz says, I think Brass Bellow finds its own genre between a typical survival game and something akin to a deep simulation game. I was aiming to lower the entry resistance of the game while still maintaining the really deep world mechanics. I've gone about removing the elements from traditional survival games that I don't feel belong, like the need to constantly collect resources through destroying the world, building with voxel-based terrain, and I've slowed down the hunger timer to a crawl so you don't have to constantly shovel food into the character's face. For me, it's all about crafting an experience that really brings home a deep sense of wonder for anyone who plays it. Having the game provide that emotional experience is definitely my biggest driver. What are your primary artistic influences with this game? Any other games, music, stories, or anything else that really inspired you in the making of Brass Bellow? And he says, Art is definitely the key driving factor of my development cycle. Some of my core inspirations for Brass Bellow are Studio Ghibli's various movies, Fez, Ian McHugh's art, Morrowind, Dwarf Fortress, and DayZ. I find a deep well of motivation when I find pieces of art that provide the sense of wonder I'm trying to craft myself. What do you think makes Brass Bellow stand apart from other open-world titles? And he says, Brass Bellow will probably be standing alone with the depth of interactability it provides. A good example of this is that I'm looking to build something where every possible world object that could be used as a container you could store stuff in is a fully functioning container. I also make a great effort of crafting things around the line where handcrafted content and procedural generation briefly meet. There are certain things like having ivy generated on walls that is better done by procedural generation. I try to take the best of both worlds and combine them into something really unique that hasn't been done before. I'm a huge fan of more traditional procedural generation, but I really crave as a developer is to take it in directions that haven't been explored nearly as much in commercial titles. Does Brass Bellow have any story or lore, or is it all about the stories you make yourself as you play? Or is it more of a purely atmospheric experience? And he says, Brass Bellow is one of those games that you discover for yourself. I want something where you form a connection with the characters of the world, and that brings it close to your heart. I'm not taking the path of a grandiose story where the player is a hero of all and saves the universe. I honestly want to create a world where nothing happening is beautiful and an experience all to its own. I think that plays into the depth of the mechanics of the game. I feel that if I try my best to craft a game around the experience of living in this world, I don't need to shoehorn a story that doesn't fit. How were you inspired for Brass Bellow's kick-butt-cool art style? Brass Bellow's art is all about trial, error, glitches, and little things that have gone so wrong they loop back around and end up going right. It's all a chaos that played off of itself and turned into something really cohesive. I mostly look for new inspiration now in paintings of landscapes, old games that are heavily limited by the time period they came out in, and forced to make creative decisions dictated by the hardware. For a game that has absolutely tiny resolution, it's probably pushing more polygons a frame than some AAA titles out there. How'd you come up with the name Brass Bellow? Does it mean something special? As for the name Brass Bellow, I wanted something that had a ring to it and played off the idea of a boat in the fog. I thought because a considerable portion of the game will be played on a boat, the name should reflect that. I know this has changed in the past and may easily change again, but what percentage of the game are you currently planning to be procedural versus handcrafted? How do you think that's been impacted by your evolving vision for the game? At the moment, and most likely carrying into the future, the balance of procedural and handcrafted leans towards the handcrafted side. All the islands in the overworld are going to be handcrafted, but some do have their own procedural flair to them. I'm saving procedural generation for things like caves, abandoned facilities, events you encounter in old buildings. Things that are done over and over again and have a combat focus can really benefit from procedural generation. What is the main experience or experiences you're trying to capture in the gameplay of Brass Bellow? What feelings are you aiming to evoke with its art and mechanics? I'm really aiming for a sense of wonder that occurs when you internalize there's a whole entire huge digital world just waiting to be explored. I think that is one of the greatest emotions games as a medium can provide. I also really love weaving tactile mechanics into the fabric of the game, having the player interact with all the facets of the world's machines and special items. I really want to take the game deep into a place of unexplored development territory and see if I can bring some new light to these topics. I noticed all the GIFs you tweeted out are in first person. Is there any particular reason why you took this route of presentation for your game? How do you think it contextualizes the experience? Did you ever consider alternative camera angles? The game is set in stone as first person only. I played around with the possibility of adding a third person camera to the game, but with the crunch resolution of it, it wouldn't work out very well without a bunch of retooling. I think that's all for the best though, because the first person perspective lends itself to the sense of immersion I'm going for and brings the world closer to home. What is your design ethos for Brass Bellow? How do you approach designing it, and how does that approach inform the experience you're crafting? I would have to say my design ethos for Brass Bellow is making the world what it needs to be to deliver on the sense of wonder and scale it provides. I don't let myself get off easy and compromise on the emotional side of what the game is about. If I don't get a spark of emotion from an area I'm working on, I toss it out and do it again, and again until it's right. Could you describe to me a day in Brass Bellow? What might I do over the course of a gameplay session? A day in Brass Bellow might look something like this. You wake up out of bed on your tugboat, take your fishing rod, and go catch some breakfast. You toss the fish in the pot to cook it up, and while it's cooking, you tend to your plants you've been collecting across the various islands you have visited. One of those plants you've even traded for with a strange merchant you met in the desert, sacrificing all the metal you have managed to accumulate by scrapping old computers along your journey. You pick some of the fruit from the plants, leaving the rest of the plant intact to grow more fruit again, go back to the pot with your freshly cooked fish stew, and chat on breakfast. Now that you are ready for the day, the world is yours, and you can do whatever you want. Travel to a distant far-off island and speak with some new locals you meet, trying to decipher an ancient language you've been working on for a while. Or maybe you are craving something more dangerous, so you head off to go fight some pirates and take one of their ships. Who doesn't want a bigger boat to live on? It's all up to you. There is so much to do and explore in the world, but don't forget to toss some fuel in the furnace of your tugboat and make sure all the parts are in working order before you set off on your adventure. Is the world of Brass Bellow predominantly dynamic or static? In what ways does it change? I think the world has some of the characteristics of both a dynamic and a static world. An example is, if you capture a pirate base or a ship in the world, pirate or not, it's yours. The pirates don't come back, they're gone for good, and that space is now yours. Or if you kill off a character in the world, named or not, they are dead for good, and that's just the way it is. I don't want people to play the game and lose respect for the power of the weapons in the world. As for the static side of things, there isn't much in the way of constructing new buildings and digging holes in the ground like Minecraft or other survival games. It's just not what the game is about. Are there quests or missions in the traditional sense, or will I set all the objectives myself, like in Minecraft? Are there any objectives provided or incentivized? I'm still working on the quest system, as it requires all the other systems to be totally finished before I can make progress on it. I'm thinking I'm going to go with something along the lines of having named characters tell you things they would like done in the world, e.g., could you go find my old hairpin I lost in the forest, if you ask. Then you have the choice of doing things for them. The dialogue system is going to be very deep and a key part of the game if it turns out the way I want it to. You will most likely be able to build a reputation with individual characters that gives you certain bonuses when interacting with them, as they become your friends over time. That raccoon NPC you tweeted out looks amazing. What role do you plan for NPCs to have in this world? What mechanics are you working on that will allow players to interact with them? Are there characters or factions? Will my relationship with them be dynamic or static to the game's lore? Thanks, the Muppet, haha. He's a mix between a cat and a raccoon. I've gotten responses from bear to cat to raccoon for what he could be. His name is Otto, and he's a bounty hunter. The final permutation of him will have him smoking his cigar with his eye patch and rifle. If it all turns out the way I want, he will come after you as the player if you start mucking about in the world doing unsavory acts. I'm planning on having a deep dialogue system, allowing the player to talk to the characters of the world and ask specific questions pertaining to what they need to know. You will also be able to trade and barter with them for goods you might need along your way. As for factions, there are a few factions in the game's world, but they are mostly for aesthetic purposes at the moment, excluding the pirates who are almost always hostile. The player's relationship with the factions and characters will change based on the actions you take in the game. If you are a terrible person and do horrible things, the character's attitudes and actions will reflect that. Are the NPCs procedural or handcrafted, or a mixture? I'm planning to have a roster of handcrafted NPCs, supplemented with generated characters that come and go as you move about the world to simulate the areas being full and bustling. Can I really play as a carnivorous plant? Yes, you really can play as a carnivorous plant. It actually changes the type of physical wounds you receive and how the damage system interacts with you in the world. If you take the carnivorous trait, which they have access to, you also gain bonus health from eating raw meat. Finally, the question we all knew was coming. When are you aiming to release this amazing thing? What are the remaining development hurdles you'll need to get over to complete it? I'm aiming for this year. I could say with 99% confidence it will be out in 2019. The remaining hurdles are honestly just finishing up the game in its whole form. I've completed most of the mechanics of the world, most of the items, and I am now focusing on AI, making the islands, and just filling in the content of the world. Where are you hoping to release Brass Bellow, and on what platforms? I'm aiming for Linux, Windows, and Mac as the first release. If the game does exceptionally well after that, I'll probably port it to the major consoles, excluding the Nintendo Switch, because it just doesn't have enough physical power to run it. Is there anything else you'd like to add? I would like to mention here that if anyone listening is thinking of getting into game development but is worried it's really hard and takes a long time to do so, that it's worth it. The hard work does pay off in the end, and I don't think there are very many pleasures in life that come close to the joy of artistically expressing yourself in any medium you like. Stick with it, even if it's hard. Thanks again for giving me the opportunity to do this interview. I really appreciate it. A big thanks to Megahertz for letting me do this interview. It was just an incredible honor. I'm just so pumped about this game. It sounds absolutely incredible. I'm really excited to see what he does with it. Thank you so much, Megahertz, for just being so cool about this and helping providing the footage and everything. This was great. I would love to do this again once your game is out, and we can talk about it all in the finished product and how that lined up with your vision and everything. It's going to be great. Guys, keep tabs on this game. You can find it at 128_MHZ on Twitter. It's the only place you can hear about it, but he tweets about the game all the time. There's tons more footage over there. It's beautiful. He talks about the game's mechanics. Just go over there, give him a follow, and stay awesome, you guys. God bless, my friends.